Hi there guys, Beau Liddell here with Images by Beaulin.com. Welcome to part 5 of my video series on exposure blending. Over the next few videos I'm going to introduce a few automated selection methods that you might already be familiar with that are usually covered well in Photoshop manuals and can serve a similar function to define an edge boundary for blending photos like I showed you in part 4 using luminosity edge selections. Unfortunately, they aren't usually as precise as that method, and to achieve a similar result usually require some additional steps to fix edge artifacts that I'll show you in part 7. Depending on the nature of the photos and scene that you're blending, you might also need to use luminosity selections to give them some needed finishing touches. While these selection approaches might not be as precise as luminosity selections, I nevertheless wanted to demonstrate them since you might find some applicability depending on your situation. The first of these methods I want to show you in today's video is known as the Quick Selection tool, which can be found in one of Photoshop's toolbars. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. You can see I have a photo here of some Badlands. These happen to be located in Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Now this is a photo that was double processed in Lightroom, where I processed it once for the sky, to darken the sky. I like to double process images because I get a better blend than if I'm trying to do them solely in Photoshop using all the various sliders. And here's an example of the version where I opened up the tones to better expose the foreground. And the Quick Selection tool is located up here in the upper left hand portion of your toolbar, and to get to that you can simply toggle by using the W key to toggle in amongst tools. And what you're trying to look for when applying the Quick Selection tool, and as the name implies, it's a relatively quick and simple way to achieve a selection, and you're looking to select edges. So here we're trying to select an edge that's going to serve as our boundary for blending two photos. And you're looking for relatively simple, high contrast or a noticeable difference in tones and colors amongst your edge, as opposed to something that's more complicated. Now you might have high contrast edges, but you might not have a very simple boundary. So for example, if I toggle to this image, you can see this is would entertain a much more complicated selection. If I zoom into it, you can see we have a lot of discontiguous background areas that would need to be selected, as well as very small areas that potentially we could use a quick selection method such as this, but for the most part we'd have to really spend a lot of time and be very intricate. So the Quick Selection tool is meant more for selecting, say, the sky versus the foreground using a horizon such as this. So I'll grab the Quick Selection tool, and then what I'm going to do is simply hold down the tool, making sure that either I've selected the button on the left or the plus sign, which will add a selection. And then I'm just going to hold down my mouse, or in this case my pen, and you don't want to use too large of a brush size. And what you're going to do is just slowly move across the boundary, and you can see here at some point, because it's a relatively simple background, that Photoshop jumped ahead, assumed what I was going to do, and selected the entire sky. Alright? And so what we can do here is turn that into a channel. I always advocate for turning your initial selections into a channel, because then you can go back to them and revise the mask and update them. If you don't do that initially and forget to save them, then if you make a change that you can't go back to your original starting point, then you basically have to start over from scratch. So for example, this is I've saved this as a quick selection right here, and you can see that right now the sky is selected, and of course I want to blend together a light image on the top with the dark image down below, and so I want to show the sky down below. So I simply invert that mask like this and enable the layer mask, and here becomes my blend. So I've then taken that very same selection and applied a contrast adjustment for the foreground, which really brings out some pop. I inverted that and applied tone down the sky a little bit more. I can take or leave that. But if we zoom into the edge of the mask, say right in here, and incidentally I can show you this is what the original photo where I tried to process all the tones just in Lightroom. So you can see that we actually have a pretty good edge here. If we look at the actual mask, you can see it's fairly hard, but a pretty reasonable selection. And as I scroll across the horizon here, you can see we do not have any really unnatural blending artifacts or edge artifacts, either light halos in the sky or any dark burn edges along the horizon. So here's just one good example of where the quick selection tool will give you and can give you a very good starting point for blending your images and then preparing them for the final creative post-processing steps. Okay. Now this next photo is a bit of an interesting one. It's a high dynamic range scene. I've taken 3 different photos. Here's the dark photo. This happens to be Forest Canyon in Rocky Mountain National Park, taken at around 12,000 feet. Here is the +2 EV photo that was taken to expose for the valley, and another exposure, a baseline exposure that was taken to expose for the foreground here. So I want to blend all these images together. And the reason why I'm showing you this image is that not only can I use a quick selection to select the horizon boundary here, but I can use it to select any portion of an image that has well-defined edges. So for example, the foreground, the various different slopes and portions of the foothills and the mountain range. So in this case, I have used a selection used or created with my quick selection tool to select only part of the background mountain range. Did that to apply a little bit of a lightening here. Haven't decided whether I'm going to eventually keep or discard that adjustment. And then I applied this layer mask, which was partially hand blended on the top, but then used the quick selection tool to select the rocks and discard those from the selection to bring in solely the middle ground of the valley. And then I used a slightly different selection, again using only the quick selection tool, and use that to apply to an adjustment layer for that middle ground. And then applied a foreground mask, shown here, to my lightest image, or my baseline image, exposed for the foreground. And then applied both that mask, shown here, as well as one of the sky, to make a couple selective color adjustments here. And this is where this image stands right now. Also, it's a really good example of 3 good baseline images of a high dynamic range scene where I didn't have to take it through tone mapping software or make any really drastic adjustments, and I have a very nice end result here. Really speaks to the power of manual blending methods for doing HDR work. But all but one of the selections that were used to blend these 3 different images together and apply adjustments were all applying the quick selection tool. So it can be a very handy tool to get things done quickly and do a sufficient job. So let's close out of that photo. And the final photo I'm going to show or demonstrate the quick selection tool on is one that we've seen before, Tipsoo Lake at Mount Rainier National Park. And so I can go over to my quick selection tool, and this demonstrates an example, not quite like this this particular photo here, a little more simple, straightforward horizon, except as you can see, we have a little bit more of a complicated horizon to deal with the background sky behind those trees. And so again, if I apply an actual layer mask or a quick selection to the sky, here's what that eventual mask would look like, and just go ahead and load that. That's what that quick selection would look like. And I, of course, can then invert that mask and then apply that to my light layer here. And you can see, first off, ignore the trees on the left, as we would expect, because they're discontiguous and complex. We're not going to get a real great result with the quick selection tool. But if we zoom into the horizon, we can see that, again, it seems to have performed very well, even given the fact that there's some complicated tones and details behind that horizon. By using the proper brush size and being very precise, and it didn't take more than 20 seconds, if that, to do this particular selection, I can get a reasonable result. But there are some issues. First and foremost, of course, we have the issue with the tree, and we could go back and do some detailed additions to this selection using the quick selection tool, but it simply isn't going to perform well because there's too much intricacy there and it's going to take us too much time. But there's some other issues. So you notice right in this region here we have a little bit of a hard transition between the foreground and background. It's not quite natural, and that's not something we want to replicate in our final blend. We have a little bit of it occurring here, especially right there. It's very noticeable there, so there's a halo, a white halo showing up behind the rocky ridge. Through this section, it's really not too bad. Now as I get over to this particular part of the ridgetop, basically from the edge of the volcano all the way up along this ridge point, you can see white halos. It's unnatural. It looks blocky, like it's been cut and pasted or otherwise photoshopped. It's not terrible, and we will be able to solve this and correct it using some techniques that I'll demonstrate in part 7 of this series. So it's not a terrible result there, but clearly there are some issues, let alone it also has not addressed the burned out highlights here in these snowfields in front of the ridge, or the overly dark areas that we're going to have to, again, use some other technique, brushing or luminosity mask, to tone that down, let alone we would have some reason or some way to have to deal with this issue here. So I guess with that, I'm going to bring this particular video to a close. I hope you learned something that you can apply in your own workflow. If you have any questions, you can visit my webpage or send me an email at the link shown in the More Info section below this video, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Stay tuned for part 6 in this series, where I'll introduce you to the other related but more sophisticated auto selection tool known as the Magic Wand tool that'll enable you to make more complicated selections compared to what you can achieve using the quick selection tool. Okay, have a good one, guys.